Good morning, everyone. We'd like to get started. So those of you just wandering in with your coffee, please feel free to come in and grab a seat. My name is Michelle Warren. I'm with the Local Government Commission. I'm not usually up here, but this morning I have the honor of being the first person on behalf of the Local Government Commission to welcome you all to the 16th Annual New Partners for Smart Growth Conference. Thank you all for being here, and you're welcome for the great weather that we brought with us. I wanted to point out that we have a series of slides that'll be going this morning before we have our plenary presentations. And this is our streamlined way of giving you some housekeeping. So take a look at those as they roll through. I have also the honor of introducing Kate Meis, who is the Executive Director of the Local Government Commission. Kate's been with LGC for more than 10 years and has been leading in several capacities in the organization during that time. She's overseen the development of the LGC's pioneering climate change programs, including our Climate Adaptation Forum, which we just had a highly successful forum in Southern California this past summer. The Civic Spark AmeriCorps program, and the Alliance of Regional Collaboratives for Climate Adaptation. Kate has been recognized for her climate change work by the Chronicle of Philanthropy as one of the nation's 40 under 40 young leaders who are solving problems of today and tomorrow. So join me in welcoming Kate.
And thank you to Michelle. Most of you probably know this already, but Michelle is really the one that makes this conference tick and makes it a success every year, along with a great team that supports her. So thank you, Michelle. And thank you all for being here, and I especially want to thank our sponsors, who one of the slides will recognize. This really wouldn't be possible without the support of our sponsors, and that support's really going to be more critical moving forward, because it's been a challenging couple weeks already for many of us in the sustainability field, with threats to the very core, really, of our work. Threats to our climate scientists, to our federal agency partners, and to the basic human rights that we all hold dear. Like me, you may be struggling to see how we come out on the other side of this dramatic shift away from federal environmental stewardship and social equity leadership as well. But change doesn't always start at the top. Change starts in individuals. Change starts here. It starts with us. And it spreads in the hearts and the actions of the people. As California Governor Jerry Brown said in his State of the State last week, in the hearts of Americans, our core principles are as strong now as ever. California won't back down, he promised. Not now, not ever. And California isn't alone. Despite what national rhetoric, despite what some of the tweets we're reading might purport, we're not alone either. 60% of Americans favor smart growth. They prefer neighborhoods with a walkable mix of houses and stores to neighborhoods that require more driving. And for good reason. Smart growth not only addresses the major health and environmental challenges we have, but it also saves money. Smart growth saves an average of 38% on upfront costs of construction and infrastructure. It generates 10 times more revenue per acre when compared to suburban development. And it saves 10% on the cost of police, fire, and other services. Americans are with us on climate science as well. According to a Gallup poll released last year, 64% of US adults say they're worried about climate change. Nations across the globe stand with us. 194 countries signed the Paris Agreement, committing to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. China announced last week that they are canceling 103 coal-fired power plants that were planned or under construction. So they are trying to move away from one of the dirtiest forms of electricity generation. And our neighbors in the north in Canada have emerged from a similar situation to our current political climate. For 10 years, under Prime Minister Harper, the federal government muzzled climate scientists, reducing coverage of climate change more than 80%. They canceled billions in federal dollars for climate funding. They targeted environmental groups, and they pulled out of climate talks. And what was the result? The provinces stepped up. British Columbia instated a carbon tax. Ontario and Quebec began emissions trading with California. And after 4 decades of anti-environment party rule in Alberta, which is an oil-rich province, they actually started a carbon tax. They voted to set a carbon tax, and they're setting carbon limits on oil sands. So this would be the American equivalent of Texas passing a carbon tax. Change is possible, and change will come. And we're seeing all sorts of subnational leadership in states and cities across the nation. The Under 2 MOU has 165 signatories committed to keeping global warming to 2 degrees Celsius. They represent over 1 billion people and 35% of the global economy. So we aren't as divided as we may seem. And we don't have time to lead with our political, racial, sexual, or religious differences. No, we will succeed by building partnerships, not walls, by deepening our commitment to each other. So that means standing up for our federal partners at US EPA, whose jobs and funding are under threat. That means standing up for our Muslim friends and colleagues who are banned from traveling, and supporting equal opportunities for all people in America. With so much on the line to maintain our current quality of life and our quality of life for future generations, it's now more critical than ever that we double down on our investment in people and rebuild communities of opportunity. The decisions we make as smart growth leaders have real tangible impacts on the people in community, tangible impacts on people's lives. At the local level, there is still a lot to be excited about. Ample opportunities and bright spots. The leaders you will hear from over the next few days are showing that despite our current political climate, progress is possible on climate resiliency, transportation, affordable housing, and social equity. There is no doubt that we have more difficult times and difficult conversations ahead. But as we move forward, it will be critical that we resist the attempts to further perpetuate the us versus them paradigm. It will be critical that we break out of our comfortable, like-minded groups. We must recognize that there are many who have lined up against us on issues we care about. Good people, colleagues, coworkers, our relatives in some cases. In this season of strife, we must develop new strategies and forge deeper alliances with each other. Because our nation needs leadership from communities now more than ever to continue to protect each other's rights and our hard-won environmental protections. That is the goal of the next 3 days, to provide resources and create partnerships so that we can increase the speed and scale of our investments in people and communities that can promote upward mobility for all. Despite how divided we may sometimes feel, we're all in this together. rich and poor, north or south, red or blue. And we have a shared responsibility to protect our neighbors, our natural resources, and the industries that energize our communities. So thank you, and I look forward to our discussions over the next few days. And at this time, I want to introduce you to LGC's board officers. We're going to do something a little different this year, and we're going to have all our officers share in our moderator responsibilities. So I'm going to start off with introducing our Vice Chair, Councilmember Steve Hansen. He's going to be leading us in our discussion tomorrow. Steve served on the Sacramento City Council since 2012, where he is a leading voice for smart growth, multimodal transportation, public safety, economic development, and innovation. During Steve's time on council, he has passed key initiatives, which include increasing protection for LGBT employees and residents, updating zoning codes to allow for urban agriculture, and he's worked tirelessly to increase infill and affordable housing in Sacramento. He's been a champion for the city's open data platform, and he'll discuss more of that tomorrow on our Smart Cities panel. Our second MC for the conference is Councilmember Michelle Martinez, who will lead Saturday morning's plenary. Michelle ran for Santa Ana City Council in 2006 and became one of the youngest elected leaders in the city's history. She represents Santa Ana on several boards. She's the vice president for the Southern California Association of Governments, which is the nation's largest metropolitan planning organization. And she's the recent past president of the National Association of Latino Elected and Appointed Officials, NALEJO. Michelle has helped the city increase its open space. She's secured millions of dollars for active transportation to ensure pedestrian and bike safety, and improved nearly 300 miles of residential streets. So she's a great advocate for active transportation and new mobility, and will be speaking on the autonomous vehicle panel. And last but certainly not least, I want to introduce our board chair, Pam O'Connor, who's a council member with the city of Santa Monica, where she served on council since 1994 and has served as mayor 5 times during that period. She is particularly interested and passionate about issues that involve sustainability and mobility. She's the past president of the Southern California Association of Governments, which, as I said, is the nation's largest metropolitan planning organization. And she led that organization in the unanimous adoption of the region's first sustainable community strategy, so quite a feat. Pam's achievements have been well recognized. She's been recognized as LA's elected official of the year by a number of organizations, including the American Planning Association. So we're honored to have her with us. She's no stranger to housing, supply, and affordability issues. So Pam, if you could join me on stage, and everybody, thank you for being here, and please welcome Pam.
Okay, good morning, partners. How you doing? Okay, so we're going to start with a short quiz. I'm from the bubble of California, sunshine. So how many other Californians are West Coasters? Okay. How many from the Northeast? Oh, see, quiet Northeastern. Okay, let's try Southeast. Nobody. Midwesterners? Now let's get really specific. St. Louis area. Okay. Cubs fans. Okay, St. Louis fans, I admit, I'm from Chicago originally and proud of it. You St. Louis Cardinal fans. And the Southwest. Okay, you loner Southwesterners. Well, we're all here together. We're all partners, and we're going to be sharing the next few days together, getting to know each other and working on the issues that challenge all of our communities in these challenging times, as Kate noted. But we're going to have a great time here getting to know each other, talking about the issues, and hearing from speakers from throughout the country. And today we're going to start with one of our partners from the federal government. I'm going to get to introduce John Thomas. And John is from the EPA. He's from the Office of the Director of the Office of Sustainable Communities here. And there he leads technical assistance programs that are offered by the agency on sustainable communities. And he oversees research aimed at developing new tools for communities. And John and the EPA have been partners with us for many years. And please join me in let's giving our federal partner, John Thomas, a rousing new partners welcome. John.
Thank you, Councilwoman O'Connor, for also the field promotion. I'm the Associate Office Director, but it's always good to get a field promotion, right, when you're up here. We're delighted to be here for the 16th year of this event. It's really terrific to see this room full of folks who are excited about sharing and learning in this subject. And I think there's a few things about this conference that are testaments to the strength of the ideas that we're all going to share here and the concepts we're going to talk about. One of the things that, not just the fact that the Local Government Commission has been doing this event for 16 years and doing such a great job, but the breadth of the sponsors. It's not just us sponsoring it. There's a wide range of public and private sector sponsors that you see on that slide that goes by. And I think another thing that, I've also noticed over the years that's really interesting is every year there's a lot of people who come back year after year to this conference, and there's also a huge group of folks for whom this is the first time at the conference. And I think, Paul Zajkowski probably did the Smart Growth 101 session again this morning, right? And so there's always a huge demand of folks who are coming to this conference for the first time. And the fact that you have that breadth is really exciting. For us as an agency, obviously, and as a federal program, the 20 years of our program has taught us that when we focus on revitalizing local economies, working with state and local partners on community-driven, locally defined solutions, that gets us huge environmental benefits when we really focus on things that encourage reinvestment, take advantage of our existing infrastructure, and then you get these walkable, vibrant places, you get better access to green space, you get greater, more equitable communities, and then it obviously comes along with air and water quality benefits. So we feel that there is, again, for us, a sort of core principle of that's our approach to environmental protection is working with communities. But that's, as you all know, complicated and difficult work, right? And so then that's really in part what we're here to do at this conference, right? To share these ideas that, the theme of the conference has this paired, practical tools and innovative strategies, right? This idea that there are things that folks have been doing for 20 years that work, and we can kind of share these very kind of practical policy approaches or engagement strategies or design strategies. But every year, one of the things I love most about my job is getting exposed to all the innovative, very exciting new stuff that's happening around smart growth and sustainable communities. So we'll be able to, spend these plenary sessions, the workshop panels, the technology fair that will be happening as a way to kind of work together and share that and learn from each other. And then, so it's, part of our ongoing commitment that we're still going to be working hard and convincing those around us in the federal government that there's just an awful lot of ways in which partnering with local communities and neighborhoods to help them figure out ways to make progress in smart growth and sustainable communities is a great approach to being a federal program. So we look forward to being part of this. Thank you all very much for coming and being part of this. And I think, do I turn it back to Councilwoman O'Connor? Thank you.
And next, we're really honored today to have Alderman Lewis Reed, who is president of the St. Louis Board of Aldermen, with us today. Alderman Reed attended Southern Illinois University on a wrestling scholarship, so I'm going to be careful, when I talk about the Cubs in front of Alderman Reed. He moved on after that career in the private sector. He worked for a number of international businesses where he managed technology, multi-million-dollar contracts and staffs. He worked for a healthcare organization. He's worked in the technology sector. So he brought that experience in the private sector with him to his public service here in St. Louis, where he has served as alderman for the 6th Ward for 8 years now. In his position there, he drafted and passed the first neighborhood-based TIF in the history of the city. He helped found the organization Bike St. Louis. He added hundreds of new housing units throughout his ward and hundreds of millions of dollars in new development, and helped bring $1.7 billion, that's with a B, billion dollars worth of development to the city. And I'm honored to share with him, being a Saluki from Southern Illinois University. So join me in welcoming my fellow Saluki, Alderman Lewis Reed of St. Louis.
All right, Cubs fans. I was looking around, I saw a lot of hands come up. I wouldn't do that in St. Louis if I was you. This is the home of the Cardinals. How many Cardinals fans are out there? Cardinals fans? Come on. All right, Cubs fans, when you have a surprise when you check out of your rooms, your room fees are going to be doubled. It's just part of the package. It's just part of the package. Any Rams fans out there? Yeah, you guys can keep them. We're done with them. We spent a year hating them. I think next year we'll just let it go finally. But we hold on to things in St. Louis. I'm Lewis Reed, president of the Board of Aldermen City of St. Louis, and we are in the midst of a mayor's race. So although I would love to spend the whole conference with you, and I so enjoy the Smart Growth conferences because you come out of it with so much great information. But this one I will not be able to spend with you because I'm one of the candidates for mayor, and I'm crisscrossing the city left and right. We go from 7 in the morning to 1 in the morning to try to get it done. So I'm apologizing ahead of time. But real quickly, while you're here in St. Louis, I hope you have an opportunity to get outside of the conference to enjoy some of the great things that St. Louis has to offer. We have a great riverfront development going on around the arch that will connect our arch to downtown. Because prior to now, the highway separated the arch from our main business district downtown. So that's what you see going on out there. We have, but also like other major cities, we have major challenges. We have housing, challenge with our housing and what we're going to do to make sure that we take care of those across our community that are the most vulnerable. And I also think that we also, not just in St. Louis, but across America, I think we have an opportunity to come together like never before. And I'm looking across this audience, and I call you my Smart Growth family. It's not going to be so cool to be sustainable across these next 4 years. There are going to be a lot of challenges ahead, but I'm confident that we're going to stand and we're going to meet those challenges. And I'm confident that we're going to make great strides through all of it. And what gives me that confidence is when I came downtown to the rally and saw tens of thousands of women with their husbands and their kids and rallying and working to make a difference. History is made by the movement of the masses, not by one person or one individual. So when I saw that, I saw history in the making. So I think we can come out of this thing stronger than what we went into it. I think if we hold to some of those principles that all of us know and that are locked inside of all of us, when we think about our neighborhoods and our communities, just communities like St. Louis, particularly historic communities, they were built by immigrants for immigrants. And that's what America is made up of. That's our true strength. Our true strength as Americans is our diversity. And we have to choose how we embrace that diversity in all of its forms, top to bottom. And if we embrace it in all of its forms and understand that we're all equal, you may have a larger paycheck than me, but you still require water, oxygen, and everything else to live. And when we reduce it to that common denominator, I think we have an opportunity to come together like never before. I think there are a lot of benefits in smart growth, and we have to continue to push that message. We can't just sit back and say, okay, I'm not gonna get involved, I'm just gonna do my little thing over here. But this is my charge and my request and my pleading to you, all of you individually. I'm sure when I look across the room, all of you individually in your respective neighborhoods and communities, you are the leaders. You're the people that show up on Saturdays when nobody else will. You're the person that when somebody needs something done or someone needs help on something, you're the first one to raise your hand, you're the first one there, last one to leave. Our charge now is to go recruit others, to tell them about the importance of smart growth. If they don't care about the environment, okay. Let's tell them about the benefits to their wallet. Let's tell them about the benefits to the safety and the growth of their kids. Let's tell them about some of those other things that may connect to them. And if we do that, we're going to expand our reach and we're going to reach our goal. Let's not look at this as a loss. Let's look at this as an opportunity to push forward, to grab more, to expand our reach and to reach our goal. So I'm going to leave you with that and just also thank Smart Growth for having the conference here in the city of St. Louis. I know when it was being planned, I was so excited because I was like, man, it'd be great. I'm going to be able to go to all of the events and everything. And then here comes the mayor's race. So, I apologize ahead of time, like I said earlier, that I won't be able to spend this time with you. But let's go out and win. And let's understand again, history, I'm going to say it one more time because it's so important to remember. Dr. Martin Luther King, sitting down in Birmingham, Alabama, standing by himself as a single man with no one around him, with no one to help him, with no one to support him, with no one to rally behind his messaging, would have been just a man. But because people showed up, and because people believed in the vision, and because people committed to that vision, they were able to move America. And that's what we have an opportunity to do now. We can move America. All of us individually, we all play a role in that. So I'm asking you to go out and collect your friends, relatives, everybody you know, bring them to the fight because we have an opportunity to win. Thank you so much for your time.
Woo! Alderman Reed, thank you. We're going to be working to move this country forward together as a team. Yes. And with inspired by his comments. So now, folks, now the big challenge. Can she work the clicker? Okay. So again, my name is Pam O'Connor, and I'm a council member in Santa Monica, California. And today we're going to have two fabulous speakers come up here and talk about the issue of housing. And I get to take a few minutes just to set the context, to give you a little sense of the challenges we're facing in my region of the country, which probably are not dissimilar from what many of you are facing in your areas. In Southern California, we're the SCAG region. Kate noted that we're the largest MPO. We are 10 million people. The county of Los Angeles is 10 million people. In the 6-county region, we are 18 million people. So if we were a state, we would be the 4th largest state in terms of population. Housing crisis runs throughout much of California, especially coastal California, throughout the length of the state. In the SCAG region, it's something all of our 191 cities are facing. So this fall, we had a housing summit where we brought together leaders in the nonprofit sector, the public sector, the private sector, local government, and advocacy groups to talk about the issue of what we need to do as a region. We had about 400 folks there, again, to say, lay out the problem so we understand it, we all know about it, to understand it better, and to start saying what are the kinds of things we can do, and as Alderman Reed noted, what are the kinds of things each one of us can do individually to help work on this issue. In my region, the affordability crisis is severe. Right now, the median price of a rental apartment keeps going up, while the median income over the last few decades has gone down. It's a challenge at all levels. At the level of lower income to the middle, the challenge of finding housing that doesn't take up more than 30% of your income is a real challenge in our region. It's impacting people in incredible ways. So how did we get here? This is a graphic that shows you how we did. We haven't been building enough housing. It shows you that, especially in the last decade of the 20th century, we were building only one unit of housing, while at the same time we were adding 4.52 people per housing unit. And as most of you know, household size has gone down over that period. So we are facing a crisis of lack of housing supply. It just has not kept up. What are the causes? Many of you know about the causes, but let's talk about them. And let's face it, some of it has to do with governments, has to do with local government. The obstacles that we put up in local government leaders in terms of our zoning codes, frankly outdated zoning codes, and other obstacles that limit housing production, as well as the community, portions of the community, not the whole community, but coming together in opposition, and loud voices, sometimes not necessarily the majority, but still loud voices opposing projects that are not low density, and that has, again, come together to say we're not producing enough housing and limiting the housing supply. Then there are the socioeconomic impacts that now are coming from not having enough housing, the increase in gentrification. In my region and other regions, sometimes the technology sector is blamed. Well, frankly, we want good, high-paying jobs, although we don't want a monoculture, we want to have economic diversity. But by not producing enough housing, it's putting pressure on the existing housing. And the existing housing sometimes is being poached by those folks who have higher incomes. And again, what does that mean to the people who have to move out? Again, not building enough housing, having impacts. The workforce exodus is happening in some of our regions, and increased risk of poverty. And all of that leads to diminished spending power. The economic impacts we all know about. Public health impacts. You can't say too much about the public health impacts because just the stress. In Santa Monica, we're working on a well-being index. We're working to measure at various dimensions about how people are doing. And one level of that, in terms of their health and well-being, is the stress level. If you're unsure about your job, if there's economic uncertainty in the region, and you are paying a lot for housing, and frankly, if you leave the housing you're in, being unable to locate an affordable replacement housing, that adds a lot of stress. And living day to day with that kind of stress takes an impact on people. As people do end up having to move somewhere else, it may mean extended commute times, less time with their families. And people are being born, more births over deaths in my region and in a lot of the United States. It's not just folks coming from other places. And people who come of age who are moving out or coming to the region from moving around elsewhere in the state or the country, they're going to find some place to stay. They'll become opportunistic, and that may lead to risks in terms of substandard housing being created. So what we're going to be talking about today and over the next few days are what are the kinds of things we can do? What can state and local government do? Well, those of you who are part of local government, and actually, frankly, you all are part of local government, whether you're an elected official or whether you're a constituent, a community member, whether you're part of a nonprofit organization or an other kind of advocacy group. We can do the kinds of things to push our leaders to utilize planning and financing tools to incentivize housing. We can work to bust those myths about housing, especially affordable housing. And again, the theme of this conference and ongoing is partnerships, building those partnerships, looking to our states for supportive legislation to help us do the job of getting that housing built in our communities. And frankly, it gets down to each and every one of us. And that's going to be, I think, the main question that we have for this conference, whether it's about housing or some other aspect of smart growth, is what can you do today? What are the kinds of things you can do starting today to make sure that housing, affordability, and housing is happening in your community? Again, mobilize those who say yes to housing. There are people, in spite of the loud voices you may hear, who say, oh, no, no, no. There are a lot of people who support it. Find them, mobilize them. Build the relationships and start educating housing opponents and those folks in the middle who might just not have thought about the issue. And again, that whole concept that this conference revolves around, which is creating partnerships and educating our local leaders, making those connections among people. Again, mobilize for housing. We can do it, and I hope you will join. Together, we will join forces to build more housing in our communities so that we have strong, vital communities, that we build that network that Alderman Reed was talking about, to have those thriving communities. So with that, I now get to introduce the first of our two speakers who are going to really be here to help inspire us, move us forward as we talk about the issues of housing. Our first speaker is Lisa Sturtevant. And Lisa has been, she's actually Dr. Lisa, has been involved in research and analysis in local economic, demographic, and housing market conditions for more than 15 years. She's worked on projects for local governments, nonprofit organizations, and in the private sector. So she has a real track record of providing insights, high-quality analysis, and has been part of consulting teams with academic institutions as well, and worked with other real estate consulting firms. Her areas of research include housing, migration demographics, and regional economic development. And her most recent research includes work on housing affordability in the county, at the county, state, and metro levels, housing demand in the Hampton Roads, Virginia, and Washington, D.C. metro areas, local affordable housing policy, and the relationship between transit investment and affordable housing preservation, particularly in inner ring suburbs. So, looking forward to hearing from her. So let's give her a great welcome. Please join me, Lisa Sturtevant.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much, Pam. Good morning, everyone. So glad to be here today. Thank you very much for the invitation to come and talk today. So pleased that we're going to talk about housing to get us started. But I actually want to start by talking about Match.com. You guys know Match.com, right? So I met my husband on Match.com. It works, so. So he's a great guy. He's a great dad now. But as you might imagine, you meet a lot of people on Match.com, right? And so I remember sitting across the table from this guy, and we were, I think, at Starbucks, and we were introducing ourselves to each other, talking about what we did. And I was telling him about the work I was doing. I was at George Mason University at the time, and I was talking about this study about the relationship between housing and economic growth. And I was telling him about the data I was looking at about how many low-wage workers who worked in retail and service industries, who were commuting an hour or 2 hours because they couldn't find housing close in near their jobs. We were in the Washington, D.C. area, and housing was very expensive. So folks were commuting sometimes 2 hours to get to work. And I told him I was real interested in whether there were local solutions for how we could expand housing options so people wouldn't have to, so folks who make less money wouldn't have to drive so much to get, so long every day. It's stressful, as we heard, to families and individuals. And I remember he said to me, he said, well, why should I care about poor people? He said, why do I want low-income housing next to my house? I worked really hard. And if you put that near my house, my property value is going to go down. And then he said, and sticks me, he said, it should be hard to be poor, he said. He said when they're in that commute for 2 hours, that should make them really not want to be poor anymore. So this is the guy I think about, right? When I talk about housing now. I talk to a lot of people who know how important housing is, but I think it's really important to understand that there's a lot of people out there. This is the guy who will come to the city council meeting. This is the guy who will write the op-ed or bend your ear at the PTA meeting. You know, this is the guy that I have in my mind when I think about starting the conversation about the role of housing in building community. So thank you, Match.com, for my husband, for that guy. So I want to cover a few things here to sort of set the stage for this broader conversation we're going to have about how we can build housing solutions at the local level. And one of the things I'm going to pick up on, right, what Pam was just talking about, is we have a housing affordability challenge in communities across the country, and a key driver of that challenge is that supply is not keeping up with demand. I promise there's only a few charts here, so bear with me. But you know, we look at the number of households that we're adding and the number of housing units that we're building at the national level. So in 2016, we added 1.2 million households, and we built 1.1 million housing units. And over the last few years, particularly since the end of the recession, household growth has really outpaced housing construction. More and more people are demanding housing, but the supply of housing hasn't been keeping up. And so, as you remember from Econ 101, right, what happens when demand goes up and supply goes down? Prices go up, right? And so that's what we're seeing here, is that as the number of the population's growing and the number of new households are forming, supply's not keeping up, prices are going up, affordability is worsening. Who are these new households? Who are these new households? Right, they're the millennials. And if we were gonna play Smart Growth Conference bingo this weekend, and millennials was one of the squares, I'm assuming that that one would get filled in a lot, because we talk about millennials a lot. I'm a Gen Xer, so this is, you know, sort of like aggravating, you know, because we don't get any respect. But millennials are really the group of people that we talk about when we talk about housing demand recently, but with good reason, right? This is a group of people between the ages of 18 and 34. These are folks in their prime household forming ages. And even though they get a lot of bad press that they're all living at home, there is a really important reason to think about the housing needs of this group of folks. They're the largest generation, surpassing their parents, the baby boomers. But more importantly, they've come into this prime household forming ages in the worst economic recession since the Great Depression. So these are folks who got out of high school or college looking for a job when there were no jobs. We lost 11 million jobs during the most recent economic recession. And so it was really hard to find a job if you were coming out of college in 2007, 2008, 2009. I don't know if any of you were doing that job search in 2008, 2009, 2010. And so even as jobs became available, the jobs we added back, and we have gained back those 11 million jobs, but they haven't been the same jobs. We've actually gained back jobs that have lower wages than the jobs we lost during the economic downturn. So the types of jobs that are available are different. And then for those who are finding jobs, wages are growing more slowly. And when you get into that career, the opportunities for advancement actually are declining a bit too, because baby boomers and us Gen Xers, we're staying in our jobs longer because of this economic uncertainty. Right, so on top of all of that, this generation is facing higher levels of student debt than prior generations. Largely as a result of these economic factors, millennials are delaying things like household formation, delaying moving out from their parents' homes, delaying marriage, not because they don't want to get married, right, but because of these economic reasons, delaying having children. But what we're seeing is as the economy has started to improve, as wages have started to go up, millennials are doing what generations in the past have done for generations, right? They're forming households, but when they're looking out at the housing that's available to them, the supply is not there. And the types of housing that they are demanding is not there as well. Just a quick look at the national picture of that data on incomes and home prices that we just saw for part of California. The red line shows change in household income since 2000. It's basically been flat, right, since 2000. And the other line shows a measure of change in home prices. Certainly at the first part of the 2000s, but even in the last few years, home prices have grown faster than incomes, until just recently. So there's been an uptick in incomes and wages, and relative to home prices, incomes are actually on the rise. But there's a lot more people who aren't buying homes now, right? Since the recession, there are so many more people who are renting as opposed to buying a home. They're renting by choice because young people tend to be renters for a variety of reasons, including the flexibility of not maybe wanting to settle in one place. But there's a lot of people who are now renters by necessity. They were left out of home ownership because they can't access the mortgage market or they faced foreclosure. And so what we're really seeing are increases in renter costs in places that we hadn't seen it necessarily before. Nationally, about half of all renters in the US pay 30% or more of their income on housing costs each month. 30% is sort of a measure that is used to set a baseline. If you spend that much, it leaves you enough left over for food and transportation and healthcare and so on. So half of renters nationwide are spending more than 30% of their income on housing each month. Across the board, in high-cost places like San Francisco, in New York City, but in places like Detroit, here in St. Louis, in Atlanta, about half of renters are spending 30% or more of their income on housing. And renters are finding it increasingly challenging to find housing they can afford because of this increase in the demand from renters. So there's an issue of wanting to increase this supply and looking for ways at the local level we can increase the overall supply of housing to meet demand. But it's not that we're just not building enough housing. We're actually not building the right types of housing. And in some markets, there's a mismatch that's growing larger between the types of housing that's getting built and what is needed to support growth of a diverse, socioeconomically diverse community. So I'm going to use the Washington metro area as an example. This is data showing building permits for the last 16 years or so. So we are below long-term averages in terms of new construction. So that line shows the long-term average. But we're also building different, right? And so about half of the new construction in the DC metro area has been multifamily in the last few years. And this has been largely in response to the significant growth in the young adult population in DC. We had a huge influx of young people come in 2009, 2010, 2011. So that's good. There was a response to population growth. But there's been there's been relatively slow growth on the single family side, including townhouses. And that ends up being a little bit of a problem as our millennials age. Like all of us, every year we get older. And what we're seeing is that as people get older and start to look for home ownership opportunities in our region, it's increasingly difficult to find home ownership as well as rental options. The housing that's also been building, in addition to us not building enough housing in DC, and this is not just true in DC, but we're really seeing housing that's being built to target one part of the market, the high end of the market. So I want to show you a couple of examples. This is who's here is from DC? Wow, okay, so good. All right, so afterwards you have to tell me if you live in any of these. So I'm curious to meet people who actually live in these communities. But this is a great community. It's called the Flats at Atlas. It's a great looking building. A studio is $1,500. You don't get a bedroom right, with a studio. It looks great, and it's in a great, thriving community. It's got an awesome rooftop deck. You can go indoor driving range. Awesome, right? $1,500 will get you 450 square feet at the Flats House. The home, and I didn't get the name until I went on their website, and it says there's no place like home. You get it? There's no place like home. So. Beautiful building, beautiful rooftop, $4,600. These were on Zillow, so these are actually units on the market to rent right now. $4,600, You need an income of $185,000 in order to affordably rent the 2-bedroom unit at the home. $90,000 income to affordably rent the 1-bedroom. So this is illustrative of the types of housing that's being built as the multifamily market is really expanded in DC. It's really targeting one end of the market. We've actually seen an uptick in condos. So this is an example of a new condo building, 1-bedroom, 600 square feet, $354,000 to get 600 square feet condo, plus condo fees in DC. Across the river in the city of Alexandria, there's a neighborhood called Potomac Yard, lots of new townhouse development. Great idea of thinking about townhouses for first-time home buyers. 3-bedroom townhouses are $900,000 in this community across the river if you're looking for home ownership. So my point is, even if you see the supply of housing increasing, in many places, the income that's being targeted is really at the high end. And people are finding it increasingly difficult. Young workers who are starting out in their jobs, families, are finding it increasingly difficult to find a home that they can rent affordably. And if somebody wants to buy their first place and live close to transit or close to employment or close to DC, it's virtually impossible for most workers to afford at this point. So, why should we care? Right? I remember this guy in Starbucks sitting across from me. Why should we care? The market is building some nice stuff. That's an indoor driving range you saw in there, right? So the market is building some nice stuff. Why should we care? Let the market work, and then eventually folks will find housing that they can afford. It doesn't always work that way. And it turns out that we should care because housing matters not just for the people who live in it, but also for the communities and for the economies in which this housing is located. So, when you build housing in a place that supports people of all economic backgrounds, you build strong families, you build strong communities, and you build resilient and vibrant local economies. And we know from research, right? We know from research that having access to stable and affordable housing is good for individuals and families. It promotes economic self-sufficiency. It helps support upward economic mobility. Kids who live in stable and affordable housing do better in school. People who live in stable, high-quality, safe housing have better physical and mental health and well-being. So housing is good for families and individuals. Housing, when you have a diverse housing stock, is also good for building diverse and inclusive communities. Communities where people have access to opportunities and amenities, and where everybody has the opportunity to prosper and to contribute to a vibrant community. So having broad-based housing is good for communities as well. And there's increasing understanding that having broad housing options is also good for the economy, right? This is that pocketbook. Talk to people about their pocketbook. That when you have housing opportunities, you can let people live and work in the same community. People have shorter commutes. Employers find it easier to attract and retain workers. There's less turnover. There's less cost with recruitment. And then you can build these communities that employers know workers want, that are these world-class communities to live, work, and play. The federal government has actually understood this link between housing and economic growth in a very tangible way. There was a study a couple of years ago that suggested that the US economy would be 10% larger now, as measured by GDP, gross domestic product. The US economy would be 10% larger now if we had enough housing built in the most prosperous regions of the United States. So if we had more housing, we'd have a bigger economy, faster economic growth. And President Obama, before he left office, issued the White House Toolkit on housing that addressed this issue directly and said, look, we need more housing, and the rubber hits the road at the local level. So here's a toolkit to look at local strategies for expanding housing options. And Jason Furman, former President Obama's chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors, said, reforming local land use policies is good for expanding housing, and it's good for individuals and families, but it's also good for the economy. It's good for economic growth. But people working at the local level, mayors, city council people, elected officials, economic development professionals, they don't need the federal government to tell them that housing is important to economic growth. From California to Colorado to Connecticut to Michigan, all sorts of communities around the country, people are understanding that it's getting harder to attract businesses in many cases when housing costs seem too high in order to support a workforce. And so local governments get this link to local economic growth and housing in a way that I don't think we've seen before. And because of that, there's this growing understanding that the solutions really need to come at the local level. So it's partially because of that there's this link between housing and economic growth. There's an understanding that this is a local solution. There's local solutions possible. At the same time, as we see these growing housing affordability challenges, we see rents growing across the country. We see very low-income folks struggling to stay in their homes. If you haven't read Matthew Desmond's book, Evicted, I strongly recommend it. I had to keep putting it down. It's a hard read, but there are people across the country for whom housing, when they lose housing, they lose everything. But the resources going to housing from the federal level, they've been shrinking for a while, and there is no reason to think that federal resources for housing are going to expand anytime soon. So innovation really has to come from the local level and has come from the local level. So one thing localities are doing is they're looking for ways to take the first necessary step, and that is to expand the housing supply. So I want to give one example. The city of Denver, is anyone here from Denver? Awesome, got Denver represented. Denver, you all added a record number of new apartments in 2016, nearly 10,000 new apartments. And up until, in recent years, Denver has experienced the fastest rent growth of any metropolitan area in the country. And for the first time this year, rents went down. Think about, and vacancy rates went up a little bit. Record apartment growth, rents didn't go up nearly as fast, in fact, went down a little bit. That gets back to this Econ 101, right? If you hold demand, they didn't lose people in Denver. So if you hold demand relatively constant, you increase supply, you can have an impact on prices. And so we can see that happening in Denver. But that's not the only thing to do. So expanding the supply of housing is certainly a necessary, but it's not a sufficient step for ensuring that housing is available to people all along the income spectrum, right? We've seen that in a place like DC that I showed you, where even as housing construction has been on the rise, more and more people at the lower end of the income spectrum have been left out. And it's not just about affordability. We know, we increasingly understand how important location is to people in order to access job opportunities, in order to have access to transit, in order to access amenities. So the location of housing in communities goes beyond just supply. The quality of that housing, high quality housing in safe, high quality neighborhoods is really important, and is where the local government, the cities, the counties, the towns, dare I say regions, could act together to help support a housing supply that is accessible to people from all backgrounds. We're going to talk with our next speaker more specifically about specific tools that have been effective at expanding housing options for people all along the income spectrum. But I just wanted to say that, there's no one silver bullet. Right? It's not like there's one thing we can do and we're like, aha, we solved it, the housing affordability challenge. For example, you've heard of inclusionary zoning. So inclusionary zoning has been adopted in over 500 communities around the country, and it takes advantage of market activity to expand the supply of affordable housing or to add affordable housing to a community. But that can't be the only tool. There's tools that reduce the cost of development, reducing parking requirements, streamlining development processes, changing zoning to accommodate different kinds of housing. This can all be part of the toolkit. Public-private partnerships, preservation. So there's a range of tools that local jurisdictions have at their disposal, and many places around the country are using these to do really innovative things to help stem the rising housing affordability challenges. Like I said, we're going to talk with our next presenter about some specific strategies. So I just wanted to leave you with one example. This is a mixed income neighborhood community in the city of Alexandria, Virginia. On the left are market rate garage townhomes. They sell for about $600,000 right now. On the right are workforce housing units. So these are 2-over-1s, 2-level condos over 1-level flats. And they're targeted at people who are of moderate incomes, up to the area median income. And they're deed restricted, right? So they would sell right now for about $350. A 3-bedroom, 2-level condo would sell for about $350. I live in the yellow one. So I bought in 2010 when it opened. So it opened in 2010. If you can peek through the 2 buildings, just at a 90-degree angle are 18 public housing units. So this community includes 10 market rate, 10 workforce units, 18 public housing units through the 2. This didn't happen by accident. We're less than a mile from those $900,000 townhouses here. This didn't happen by accident. This happened as an intentional partnership among the city, the housing authority, and a for-profit developer. The city owned the land. The developer agreed to provide housing at a range of incomes. And what that meant that people who live in the workforce units, for example, include bus driver, a taxi driver, a teacher, a chef, a police officer. I was an assistant professor at the time when I bought my place, can take advantage of this neighborhood that is 3 miles to DC. We have Capital Bike Share, we have Farmers Market, we have this awesome path. And so this idea that being intentional, right, and local governments being innovative are what's going to be required in order to ensure that new construction, even as we want to increase overall construction, that new construction really serves people from all backgrounds and allows people from all backgrounds to take advantage of these high-quality neighborhoods. So that's the guy from Match. The one I married, not the one who said, why should I care about poor people? But so I look forward to having time for questions after our next presentation, but of course, please don't hesitate to reach out to me if we don't have a chance to talk today. And thank you very much for the chance to talk with you this morning.
Okay, wow. Getting us inspired. And now we're going to find out a little bit more about solutions and approaches, and we're going to hear from Meea Kang. And Meea is founding partner of Domus, bringing over 17 years of professional experience in the field of housing development. Her background is in art, in design, architecture, construction, housing, and community development. And that provides her with a rich source of insight into how to make the projects she develops unique. So join me in welcoming Meea Kang. All right.
Thank you, Pam. Ditching my notes. So I'm going to give you the perspective of what it really takes to be a developer building housing in infill locations. You know, all the places that we want to have housing, near transit and walkable communities with existing services. And we think, wow, there's great opportunities in all of our communities, in our suburban communities, our rural communities, and our urban communities. There's lots of vacant land, there's lots of redevelopment opportunities. So why can't it be done? I set out about 14 years ago to start my company, Domus Development, with a focus on building affordable housing in infill locations in our existing communities to do just that, to bring affordable housing opportunities that provide income diversity and housing opportunities to make our communities stronger. But unfortunately, as a developer, we face a lot of obstacles. Here's a slide that I created to kind of illustrate what it really takes to build a project from scratch in California. Every single one of these barriers is an opportunity for the project to be derailed. So there's a lot of inherent risk. So why is it so hard to develop housing? Because it's risky and it's expensive. The first challenge, of course, is finding a piece of land to begin with. In urbanized areas, land is vastly more expensive than in sprawl communities where there's nothing around. So for that, not only do you have to overcome the high cost of land, but then, of course, you have neighbors. And sometimes those neighbors don't want to see change. Sometimes those neighbors are considered NIMBYs, right? And sometimes they give developers a hard time. So again, as a developer, you manage your risk level. Is this something I can take on? Is this something I can overcome? So if by chance you can overcome finding a piece of land, getting your community neighbors to support you, you've got to deal with political leadership. Sometimes we don't have such enlightened leaders like Councilmember O'Connor in Santa Monica. Sometimes we have leaders who don't support housing. Or sometimes we have new administrations who come in within the first few days and absolutely unwind everything that the previous administration did. So we have to sort of look at the long run. What is it going to take to actually get this through? So if you can accomplish that in that first step, finding land, get that support, then you can move on to the next step. And that's your entitlements. That's your approval process. What is it going to take to get your project approved? First, it's got to pencil, right, from a development perspective, but at the same time, you got to fit your zoning. Well, what do we have? We have nothing but regulatory impediments. We have rules that tell us what we have to do. We have all these boxes that we have to live in. And oftentimes we have outdated zoning. We have zoning that people don't want to change because it's worked for 50 years, so why do we need to change it? Oftentimes that new housing that we talked about for those millennials, they want multifamily, they want higher density housing, but we have zoning that dates back to the 1950s. So what do? We often have to change things. So unfortunately, I like to challenge the status quo because unfortunately, the status quo means that things don't change in many respects. So as a developer, you've got to challenge that. And then with that, once you challenge that, that means you're out of the box. You have to be asking for variances. And so then you get put through the absolute ringer of the most arduous process. Sometimes I call it death by 1,000 razor blade cuts because it is arduous, because no one's ever done it before. You're out of the box from the beginning, so you get the book thrown at you. So I've done a lot of different kinds of processes. Very expensive, very challenging. If you make it through that and you don't die, you can go to the next level, which is fees and infrastructure. This is when the cities, and in California, you pay it forward. We actually tax all new development, and we look at what those impacts might be going forward. We'll put a number on it. Not just couple $1 million. We're talking millions and millions of dollars in some cases. Typical impact fee in the California is anywhere between $30,000 to almost $60,000 per unit. You get school fees, fees to social public services, you name it. And cities come up with fees. I can't tell you how many times they invent fees. Usually at the very end, right when you're ready to pull permits, is when actually your fees double. But you're so pregnant at that point, you got to move forward. So you pad for that. You come up with contingencies. And you're like, I'm still going to make this happen. I'm committed. So once you get through sort of figuring out what everyone wants, in California, not only do you pay fees, you also have to improve existing infrastructure. So a lot of these communities that now you have new density, you have to put in new sewer, new water, new electrical. And guess what? That often falls on the shoulder of the first guy out of the gate, which is me, which is that developer who's got to figure it all out. Not only do we have to build it, we sometimes have to engineer it. And that means working with hordes of people to try to come up with what we can do in the public space. Once you get through that, you also have often environmental. When you have infill sites, let's see, sometimes they were industrial, sometimes they're brownfields, sometimes they're historic. You don't know. You kind of come at it, cities look at you and they give you the ringer because, of course, we want nothing to go wrong on this site because whatever it was before was polluting. So you have to take it to the next highest level. And in California, you don't get any streamlining for building on brownfields, even though you actually want to seize brownfields. You actually go through a more stringent process if you're actually trying to clean up the land. So once you can kind of get through your CEQA processes and whatever other environmental processes, you can kind of finally take it to how do I get all this financed, right? You've got the long laundry list of everything you're supposed to fix, right? Infrastructure, pay all your fees, build all your housing to whatever density levels you can get approved. And then if you're building affordable housing, there's something called subsidies that you need. In order to make below market rate housing available for 55 years plus in the state of California, it requires subsidy. It requires a public commitment of funding so that we can provide this housing so it's permanently affordable. So that means a local commitment, and that also means a state commitment. In many cases, it's a federal commitment of funding. And it's hard. We compete for it. It's scarce in the state of California. We lost redevelopment agencies, and we all know that. We're still feeling the pain from it because we have no replacement. So finding the kind of subsidies that you need to make this happen has huge benefits and a co-benefit beyond just building the housing because we're also rebuilding our towns. We're rebuilding infrastructure. We're putting in new sidewalks. We're improving transit. We're doing all kinds of things that a regular suburban single-family home in your suburbs are not doing. So it costs more to build infill housing in all the places that we want. So if you finally can get all of your financing together, then you can finally start construction. So inherently, it's not easy. So we kind of wonder, why aren't we building enough housing to kind of keep up with our population demand? Well, part of it is because it's so dang hard. But there are folks like me, sometimes people call me an agitator because, it takes someone out of the box to kind of push through some of the status quo that's there. So the first project, I'm going to go through a few of the projects I did, and I'll tell you a little story about each one and sort of the regulatory barriers that we had to overcome, just to give you a flavor of what it takes to develop housing in California and similarly in infill locations throughout the country. So when I first started my company about 14 years ago, I decided to take on this project. This is the seediest motel in the city of Oakland. It was called the Hillcrest Motel. And back in 2003, we had a mayor named Jerry Brown, who was the mayor of Oakland, and he passed something called a blight law. And actually, because of this building was the third busiest hotspot in the city of Oakland. That meant emergency calls, ambulance, fire, police. Because this was a motel that was on a main corridor in the Diamond District of Oakland, so if anyone knows that, and it's along MacArthur Boulevard. MacArthur Boulevard used to be a major thoroughfare, lots of cars, lots of little motor inns, right, where you just pull in and you could stay. Well, they built a new freeway, and all of a sudden these little motels no longer, anyone really kind of went by. So what happened is the owner just started renting it out to anyone who needed a room for a couple of hours, for the night, you name it. So it was filled with actual drug dealers, prostitutes, and pimps. And so for 25 years, this seemingly mild-mannered motel became a crime haven. And the community felt all of its impacts. And so all of the neighbors felt the impacts, and they were outraged. And so for 25 years, they couldn't see revitalization in their community. No businesses would open up because they were afraid that they were going to get mugged, shot, or robbed. Child prostitution was going on here. So when you saw a 13-year-old on the street, you weren't sure if she was skipping school or she actually worked out of the motel. It was quite scary. And so for that, Mayor Jerry Brown passed the blight law, along with then Jean Kwan, who was, I know, a member of a local government commission years ago. And so we worked together. I purchased this property, and we built this, which is called Lincoln Court. 82 units of affordable senior housing, the first ever supportive senior housing project in the city of Oakland. 30% of this population were for seniors who were homeless or at risk of being homeless with a chronic disease. We partnered with a local nonprofit called Self-Help for the Elderly. They opened up a senior center. We have a 4,500 square foot senior center that not only provides supportive services to the residents who live here, but also to the community at large. For 30 years, there had not been a new development for senior housing in this particular area. The demand for housing, as we know, I'm a Gen Xer, but of course our baby boomers, we're 10,000 seniors a day in America are becoming 62 and older. According to AARP, right now today, 1 out of every 5 people are over the age of 50. And in California, by 2030, 1 out of every 5 people will be over the age of 60. So we are graying as a population. This was built during the high times. This was completed in 2006. We had 1,400 applicants. We leased up in less than 2 weeks. Senior centers, lunch programs, enrichment programs all go on throughout the day, free to our residents. But what did it take to get there? We started with a density of 30 units to the acre along this major corridor. We had to change the density. We got up to 82 units per acre. First, the city wanted a parking requirement of 2.5 parking spaces per unit for senior housing along a major bus line that has frequent buses, and we're 1 mile from BART. So I had to argue. I had to prove. I had to go through a variance process. I had to go through whatever process we had to go through. And of course, when you go into a process as a developer and you go and you tell your community, I'm going to vary from your standards, all of a sudden you're a deviant. Somehow you're outside the rules, and we're going to then take it to you, and we're going to show you what you need to do to kind of accommodate all this. And so it was challenging, but because I was able to really get this community behind us and we were taking down this motel, I got people to support higher density and lower parking. And then boom, we were able to make the project happen. And for that, the crime rate dropped 40% in the area after we completed construction. And it ushered in, thank you. We were a block from the major Diamond District neighborhood where the grocery store had just shut down the year we bought the building because there was so much crime, people were leaving, they were just leaving this community altogether. Back at the time, too, I think the average rent in Oakland for a 1-bedroom apartment was $2,000 a month. We had rents when we started as low as $260 a month for those homeless seniors, and our highest rents were $750 a month. So we're 20 to 50% of area median income. Moving on, City of Sacramento, Steve Hansen's district, actually. Steve, if you're here, always a great ally. I took a site, first TOD in the City of Sacramento, Site is about 1.2 acres. We had to, of course, blow open the whole entitlement process. This was a former brownfield. It was an auto body repair shop, very small sites. But it happened to be near the third busiest light rail station in the entire city of Sacramento. And I needed to build density in order to make these teeny parcels work. Well, I had to go through an 18-month process, 16 special permits and variances to get me to 72 units to the acre, and a parking reduction from 2.5 parking spaces down to 1. I had to argue really hard to not build hundreds of parking spaces next to a transit stop. Because the reality of that, parking meant that there was no project. You couldn't pencil it. How do you build structured parking? The cost of a structured parking space in California can be as high as $50,000 a unit. And then we find that people are changing. So this development, we heard about the millennials, this is 80 units of affordable housing. When it opened, hundreds and thousands of people applied. At the end of the day, we ended up with a population where 80% of everyone who moved in was under the age of 30. 40% of the population never used their car. They parked it there one-to-one, but they walked, they took transit, or they rode their bikes to work on a daily basis because they had choice. And so what I would tell my local government friends as I challenge them on parking is, we're not building housing for everybody. It's not an egalitarian process. It's not like everybody needs to have parking for every single one of their cars. But we have choice. When we can actually choose housing over free parking, people will choose to get rid of their cars. Or if you can provide alternatives to transportation, people will choose to get rid of their cars. If they can pay less for housing and not have parking, people will choose housing over free parking. So we proved it here. And as a result, we prompted and ushered in, at the time we built in the recession. So we actually, in the darkest days of the recession, we actually created 400 jobs at the same time when very little was happening. And when we completed our construction, the process was so lengthy to get through, we had to break every single rule in the book in the city of Sacramento. So during the recession, the city of Sacramento, this ushered in a whole new way of thinking, and the city of Sacramento created a whole new zoning code for downtown, modeled after La Valentina, where they increased heights, increased densities, eliminated parking requirements. And the joke was, well, Meea, had you waited 5 years, you would have had all this new zoning. But I said, if it wasn't for me, you actually wouldn't have created all that because you didn't see what all the different issues were. Setbacks, height, all these things, these outdated regulatory requirements make it really hard to do TODs for a modern world today. So fortunately, also in 2003, La Valentina and the city of Sacramento and Domus were awarded EPA Smart Growth Achievement Project of the Year and Best Built Project. And we showed that you can actually build successful housing with reduced parking, and it works. It doesn't create the Carmageddon that people, your transit planners, I can't tell you the fact that I argued with the planner because he modeled this development where every single person left at the same time of day for work, and every single person came back at the same time of day with their cars. And I kept arguing for the transit, but their models didn't allow for it. And now they do. So come to Sacramento, build, lots of good things are happening there. Moving on, this is the city of Pittsburgh, California, which is in Contra Costa County, Bay Area. A new E-BART station is being built. The city had spent a lot of time revitalizing their downtown. Small community, about 35,000 people. A former developer wanted to do a market rate development, big recession. City was left with a 2-acre piece of land empty in the middle of their downtown. They were desperate to do something. They came to me. I said, you gotta work with me on density. First, they only wanted 20 units to the acre. We got them up to 55 units to the acre, which for this community was a big deal. We had to reduce our parking, senior housing. They wanted 1.5 parking spaces. We got down to 1 parking space per unit. That was a struggle. But what was really interesting was that when it all got filled, only half of the parking spaces ever got used. So even though we offered 1 parking space per unit, I built a 2-level parking garage at the cost of about $40,000 per unit. But seniors don't even own cars. Why? Because the average cost of a car, ownership, maintenance, lease payments, you name it, is about $15,000 a year. The average income for the seniors who are living here is $25,000 a year. If they don't have to have a car and they can get around, they can walk, take transit, They choose not to because their life is easier and they can have more money to spend on themselves or locally in their community. So, it really also showed me that even having lower parking requirements doesn't necessarily mean that that is sized for the community that's living there. So parking for me was one of those, frankly, holy grails that I had a mantra on, because every single time I'm building a development, I have to deal with these damn parking requirements. So I was in the city of Vallejo. I was picked by the city in the middle of the recession when the city of Vallejo was the first city in California to declare bankruptcy. So that was when they picked me to help them. So the city of Vallejo had a lot of foreclosed properties, if we can kind of remember back a couple of years ago. And one of the areas of a lot of foreclosed properties was downtown Vallejo. So Vallejo was one of these old communities. It was one of the original state capitals for the state of California. And this little building over there that's sort of shorter was the original city hall from 1871. And next to it is the large building, was the original Masonic temple from 1917. And it was used as a Masonic hall from 1917 to 1978. But when I came to town, these buildings had been foreclosed and empty for 4 years. To believe it or not, I bought both buildings for under $500,000. Buildings were falling apart, they were historic, and everyone said, well, what are you gonna do with it? I said, I'm gonna build artist live-work housing. Because one, I think artists will move to Vallejo. They're being priced out of San Francisco. It's only a ferry ride away. And I've got incredible spaces and a performance hall. I had this Masonic, so we restored it all. It was very challenging, but we did it. We used historic tax credits. We worked with the community. But at the same time, we really had to push the density. So originally, the housing actually had 10 units associated with visiting Masons who would stay there. So the original density was 50 units to the acre. I had to double that to 97 units to the acre. So can you imagine that, going into a community and say, oh, by the way, I'm going to build 97 units to the acre in your community? It wasn't easy. Not to mention the fact that they wanted 1.5 parking spaces per unit. They actually demanded I go buy another piece of land somewhere and build a garage. Of course, across the street was a parking lot, surface parking lot owned by the city that had 500 empty parking spaces on a regular basis. So I said, can't we work something out where my residents can park across the street? Eventually, they gave it to me and they let me build this building at 0 parking. But it took a long time. It took a year to move that forward. And I kept thinking, gosh, all the planning books I'm reading, everyone I'm talking to, everybody wants infill. Everybody wants all these things that I'm trying to do. Why are all these barriers here? Why does it have to be so hard? Well, that's the life of a developer. But finally, I was starting this project a couple of years ago in the city of Stockton, another city that declared bankruptcy. It's a challenging neighborhood, challenging community, but I was really drawn to this community. There's great opportunity. So I found a vacant piece of land, and I was working with the county because they had some funding that they needed to spend on affordable housing, and that funding was specifically for individuals with mental illness. So they said, Meea, can you build us a project where you can include housing for people with mental illness? I said, oh, that's a tough one. Okay, let me think about this. So I decided to come up with a veterans project, something that would have housing for veterans, because that was a great need at the time, but then we can also intermix this idea of mental health, right, and providing support and care. So we devised a plan. But I needed to get a certain amount of density out of the site. Remember, density is not only what's necessary, it's also necessary from a financing standpoint. So I was able to easily design, within the existing sort of envelope of what was allowed, a 50-unit project, which ended up at 73 units to the acre, which actually worked in the downtown zoning code. But of course, the city of Stockton wanted 2 parking spaces per unit. And I kept saying, well, you know, 30% of the population are going to be mentally ill and homeless. Not to mention everyone else is going to be, you know, of some level of support, and they're really not going to own cars. Well, this is Stockton. This is in Central Valley. Everyone drives, and everyone owns at least 4 cars per household. So they kept saying, well, there's really nothing we can do. You just got to provide that parking for your homeless, mentally ill project. And it drove me nuts. And I said, you got to have something. And so I pulled in state law. We have something called the state density bonus law that allowed for some provisions to reduce parking. But it actually was not very clear. You can get some density and some other incentives. The city really didn't want to use it. I pushed and pushed and pushed. And eventually, it took me about a year. Eventually, they caved, and they let me reduce the parking down to 0.45. But you know, I was just getting really frustrated with this whole parking thing. This parking thing was really getting to me because I'm thinking, that's low-hanging fruit, people. All you need to do is change your requirement and you unlock a subsidy, a hidden subsidy. We're talking millions of dollars. Instead of having to build structured parking garages, you all of a sudden can make projects pencil by just resizing the parking requirement. Then all of a sudden your density can work. We can stay in wood frame, we can build cheaper, we can have a greater economy of scale. Well, you know, that doesn't necessarily bode well for a lot of local governments who feel as though, you know, they've got to balance community pressures and their neighbors and their desire for no housing. You know, and often what happens is parking becomes a proxy for NIMBYs. So anytime a developer comes and says, oh, you know, I need to reduce my parking down to 1-to-1, all the neighbors are saying, but wait a second, what about my street parking? And you say, well, wait a second, don't you have a garage that has 2 parking spaces in it? Oh, well, that's filled with stuff. We never park in the garage. You know, people tend to forget that the street parking is everyone's parking. It isn't, you don't own, if you own a house, you do not own the parking on your street. Sure, you park there, your neighbors park there, your friends park there. You don't own that parking. Yet there is a sense of entitlement when you come to communities, that parking is a right. As a citizen of the United States, you have a right to have as many parking spaces, free parking spaces as you can. So I set out on a journey. It sort of became a little bit of a passion, and I do a lot, I'm one of those serial volunteers, so I do a lot of different things. I'm with a lot of different associations. So I set out to come up with a state law that would actually allow local governments to reduce parking because the state law would cut through the local bureaucracy and red tape. But that wasn't easy, so I had to get some allies to help me. So I started working with Professor Donald Shoup, who in 2005 published this book, The High Cost of Free Parking. And I assume people in this room have perhaps read it or at least heard about it. And of course, Professor Shoup, distinguished research professor at UCLA, concluded minimum parking requirements are excessive. They add cost, and they take space that could otherwise be used for housing, right? We saw all those empty parking spaces in our project in Pittsburgh. We could have put a whole other level of housing there at the time, but we couldn't because we were limited by parking. So what does that mean? We had to really formulate a plan. And to be honest, in 2009, I had actually tried to do statewide parking reform with one of my associations called the California Infill Builders Association. And all it was back then in 2009 was 1 parking space per unit for a TOD. In other words, be near major transit, 15-minute headway. Seemed reasonable. The legislature thought so originally, went through every policy committee with unanimous support. It wasn't until I got to the Senate floor where I lost by 1 vote. And it was devastating, because I thought, wow, it really isn't the policy that matters, it's the politics that matter in Sacramento. So I was turned off, and I said, oh, forget it, I'm not gonna do that anymore. But a couple years later, Donald Shoup actually lobbied me, and he's like, Meea, we gotta try this again. These minimum parking requirements are killing housing affordability in the state. Let's come up with something else. So I pulled together a little SWAT team of some really smart people, like Jeffrey Tumlin from Nelson Nygaar, folks like Stuart Cohen from Transform, of course, Professor Donald Shoup and Mike Manville, and kind of came up with a little focus group to come and think about how are we gonna approach this again? And so we came up with this idea of taking that state density bonus law and coming up with a way to eliminate minimum parking. But it wasn't easy. I had to do a lot of lobbying up and down the halls of the state capitol in Sacramento. So one of the things that I did was a lot of research. And one of the things that I thought was really fascinating, and I don't know if everyone can see these tables, but in 2000, and some research from UCLA proved that Los Angeles has the lowest per capita car ownership in all of California. Car ownership rate. It's 0.54. And in San Francisco, it's 0.59. So we tend to think San Francisco, more people don't have cars. Well, in Los Angeles, guess what? Per capita, at least, fewer people have cars. Yet in the household growth in Los Angeles, which I also found to be really interesting, because, you know, LA, largest metro community in the US, 90% of all the new households own less than 1 car. Of that population, 40% own 0 cars. Everyone else is just down to 1 car. So as we heard, the millennials, seniors, they're populations that own fewer cars. They're the ones taking transit. They're the ones that are finding different ways to get around. You know, they don't want to spend all their time sitting in gridlock traffic. So we're seeing trends change. So that gave me an in into the legislature, and I really pounded that hard. Fortunately, at the time, my legislator author was from Southern California. It was Ed Chow from Los Angeles County, from the San Gabriel Valley. Big champion of this with me. We worked the halls, we made it happen, and on October 9th, Governor Brown signed the law. So for the first time ever, we can actually legalize reduced parking. what the bill really does is it changes the density bonus law. So you have to have some affordable housing included in your project, but projects that are containing some level of affordable housing are entitled to greatly reduced parking requirements. Specifically, I'll tell you. So specifically, it's 0.5 for a mixed income project. If you're a half a mile away from major transit, it's 0.5 per bedroom. If you're 100% affordable, it's 0.5 per unit. And what that means is that's just your starting number. So instead of starting out at 3 parking spaces per unit and making developers beg for reduction, you're starting out lowering the bar to begin with. So developers can choose to build more than half a parking space per unit, but they get to start their negotiations at 0.5. We also put a provision in there for senior housing. So senior housing is 0.5 per unit, and special needs housing, housing mentally disabled, homeless, you name it, starts out at 0.3. And you don't actually need to be near major transit for either of those two categories, as long as you're by a project, by fixed transit, a half a mile of a bus line that picks up 8 times a day. And that was because I've done rural housing, and in a lot of those communities, you don't have great reliable transit, but it does tend to come once an hour. And so that, instead of having different designations for rural, suburban, and urban, that kind of satisfied that. So that unlocked the power, at least to include inclusionary, along with density bonus and reduced parking. And from that, the state and local governments were able then to essentially subsidize new mixed income housing near transit. And so for that, as soon as the bill got passed, I was going through a process of entitlement in San Diego County, in the city of El Cajon. El Cajon is a small community, about 35,000 people living there. And the city had approached me and said, we need to build some affordable housing, help us. I found a piece of land, it was 1 acre. The only way I can get a project that worked was about 70 units to the acre. They had no zoning in their community that would allow 70 units to the acre. So we had to go through a variance process. And of course, I needed to reduce parking. I wanted 1-to-1 parking ratio. That represented a 70% reduction from their standard. So that wasn't easy to get also. But at the Planning Commission, the planning director actually read the bill, AB 744, to his planning commissioners and said, I'm sorry, the state's making us do this. And then they all unanimously approved it. And so fortunately, this project was successful last year, and it won the very coveted and competitive cap and trade funding. And so one of the key things, if you're from California, is reduce that parking, because it means less GHG, greenhouse gases, associated with your development by just simply reducing parking. And because we had a bus stop right in front, a direct line to the San Diego trolley, you get there in 10 minutes from our stop, and 30 minutes to downtown San Diego, we're increasing a bus line. So we're gonna have weekend service and evening service to better serve our population. We start construction later this year, and it's 100% set aside for veterans and veteran families. Thank you. So I'm feeling excited, thinking change is in the air, and parking reform is the future, and deregulation of housing is going to increase supply. And I was delighted when our former administration in 2016, in September, came out with their housing development toolkit. And for the first time ever, the administration concluded that land use regulations and regulatory burdens and lengthy processes increase housing costs and reduce supply, simply. And for that, they laid out 10 action steps on what local governments can do, taken from great examples of what local governments have already done around the country, starting with establishing by right development. In other words, allow housing everywhere in your community. Don't make us go through special processes. Don't make us go through conditional use permits. By the way, this is still online. I think the administration has not yet taken this offline. You can find this and read it. Also, taking vacant land, either tax it or give it to nonprofit developers to build affordable housing. Do something with the land assets that are in your community. Incentivize people that own that land to either sell it or give it away. Streamline the process. As you saw on that table, it takes money and it takes time. If you want developers to come into your communities, make it easy for us. Lay out the red carpet. Help us along the way. Don't set roadblocks in front of us. Allow housing to be produced. It will create supply. It will help housing affordability. It will create more affordable housing. Eliminate that damn off-street parking requirement, or at least dramatically lower it, resize it for our future. Again, we're looking at millennials and seniors moving into the same locations. They drive less. Allow accessory dwelling units, you know, the granny flats, the little units that can go behind people's homes. Just allow everyone to build it. If they want their children out of their home and they still want them in their property and they can move in the backyard, allow people to have those units there. In California, it's now state law. We are allowing anyone that wants to build an accessory dwelling that you now legally can. Establish density bonuses, finds ways to incentivize that density, give away density. Density is nothing. Make sure it's the form. Is it the size of the building? Is it the look of the building? That's what you can care about. Don't worry about that density. We're building smaller units as they go. We're not sizing for 3,000 square foot units in these urban locations. We're looking at about 1,000 square feet or less. Employee inclusionary zoning. Developers, especially market rate developers, they understand inclusionary. They know how to underwrite it. Be clear and create certainty. Developers will be able to respond to that clearly. Establish a development tax or a value capture incentive. Find ways to finance this stuff into the future. You know, when you're bringing in new people, that's going to be new income. Your sales taxes are going to go up because people will be spending more money locally. Allow them to do that and find a way to value capture it, find a way to use it for your future and to continue to invest in these communities. And, you know, come up with creative ways to use property tax abatement so that you can incentivize people with properties and a lot of times long-term ownership of properties to actually get off their chairs and do something about that site. And so we can do it. I'm a strong believer that we can. We can work together to break down the rules that stand in the way of building new housing. And I have to say, this is from President Obama about a year ago in his remarks to the US Conference of Mayors. So if anything, if we're going to look at our future, and we know our next 4 years are some dark clouds ahead, but at the local level, we can do it. These are the things you have the power to do. You have the power to pass new laws, new initiatives, new incentives. These are cheap and easy ways to encourage housing in your communities. And I am very happy to be here, and I'm happy to answer more questions, and I really hope folks will go back to their communities and start making change happen at the local level. Thank you.